Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 4th regular meeting of Council. I'd firstly like to recognize we're on the traditional territory, the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. The question period sign-up sheets are at either end of the partition wall near the gallery. And if during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item only, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. And at the start of question period, I'll call up those who signed to the podium to address Council. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. And I understand, Ms. Goury, we have what we'll add is item 10A, a delegation from Jeff Griffiths. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. Mr. Griffiths is here. If anyone has any questions regarding his rezoning application under item 10A, though he doesn't wish to speak as a delegation, he just signed up in case Council has some questions for him. So he won't be getting up unless that's the case. And also, Your Worship, for consent item 9A2, the Council resolutions update, I was hoping Council could remove that from the consent item list to be considered separately after the other consent item, just so that I can maybe give a brief description to the public as to what that was regarding.
Okay, thank you. Motion for the approval of the agenda? So moved. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried, thank you. A motion for the adoption of minutes is circulated. So moved. Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Motion carried, thank you. I'm not going to bother to give a report tonight, nothing terribly dramatic since the last meeting, except to say that I'm always delighted to see members of the audience here participating in civic politics in Nanaimo. Presentations, we have a presentation from, I hope I've got it correct, Julie Pisani, Program Coordinator, Drinking Water and Watershed Protection in Nanaimo Regional District, regarding water, drinking water and watershed protection. Good evening, nice to see you.
The RDN board table. Okay, so thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I have a presentation for information for the Nanaimo Council on the surface water quality trend report that was presented to the RDN board in December, and I'm currently on a bit of a tour to the different respective councils presenting the results from this report that are of interest to the respective municipalities. So I'll start off here with my first slide, which introduces just high level here, the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program. So this program is a regional service that serves all 7 electoral areas and all 4 member municipalities within the region, with the primary focus of water sustainability initiatives in terms of education, science, and planning and policy advocacy. This program is the first of its kind in BC, and we've just wrapped up 10 years of implementation of the program. But what I'll be speaking about directly is an initiative we have under our science program within drinking water and watershed protection, where we're tasked with the mandate of compiling monitoring data and an inventory of the water resources within the region. So this involves data collection on surface water and groundwater in terms of quality and quantity. And in particular, the program I'll be speaking to and the results from a 7-year data set is with our Community Watershed Monitoring Network. Now, this is a network tasked with gathering data on surface water quality across the region. So this is within the rivers, creeks, and streams across the RDN, and it's sampling for some key parameters or indicators of stream health. So this is dissolved oxygen, turbidity, conductivity, and temperature. Now, the key crux of this program is working with community members. So you may have heard the term citizen science before, and this program really brings citizen science into effect within our region, where we train volunteers from stewardship groups, 13 different groups across the region, who are able to monitor 62 sites across the region for water quality data. Now, this really helps to fill a gap in terms of the province would only be monitoring 3 different sites. So this really allows us to engage the community, collect data to better understand the health of our creeks and streams. So we play a role in coordinating the program. So we administer the equipment, provide the training, enter the data, and we have one of our staff, Lauren Fegan here, who is a really important part of that program. And we are able to coordinate with those volunteers and actually engage consultants to do a comprehensive analysis, which I'll be presenting today. So it's built on partnerships with the province, with community stewardship groups, and also with Mosaic Forests, who does provide land access to some sites in the upper watersheds within the region. So now that we have a sense of the program, I'm going to jump into a bit of an overview of the sites that we monitor. So as I mentioned, it's a regional program. So across the regional district of Nanaimo, we look at water regions. So these are essentially basins or large-scale watersheds that allow us to sort of have a framework of looking at our region beyond political jurisdictional boundaries, but in terms of boundaries of how does water flow across our region. So we look at our region in terms of 7 water regions, from in the north, Big Qualicum River, Little Qualicum River, French Creek, Englishman River, and then as we move into the Nanaimo area, Water Region 5 is Nanoose to South Wellington. And then we also have, just south of Nanaimo, of course, is Nanaimo River water region and Gabriola Island. So the sites of interest for my presentation this evening will focus on sites that are monitored within the municipality city of Nanaimo, and also some neighboring sites just south of the city of interest in the Nanaimo River as well. So we'll look here at, there's some key stewardship groups who are engaged with collecting the data across the region, particularly within areas of interest to Nanaimo. So I'll give reference to the Wally Creek Streamkeepers, Departure Creek Streamkeepers, Island Waters Fly Fishers, VIU Student, as well as the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust. So we'll take a look and zoom in here on a few sites, particularly starting with Wally Creek and Departure Creek Streamkeepers. So we'll wait for it to get less fuzzy there, but as you can see, of course, Wally Creek Streamkeepers, they monitor Wally Creek within more of the north part of our region, and there's 3 sites where they're collecting data. Departure Creek Streamkeepers are looking at Caudle Creek as well as Departure Creek. And you'll see in this map, the coloration has to do with land use categories. So I'll give you another image here. So not only were we looking at the water quality results, we were looking at the land use categories within the watersheds of each of these creeks and streams. And part of the analysis was to determine whether land use has a quantifiable effect on water quality results. So quickly, just looking at Caudle Creek, Departure, and Wally Creek, primarily we're seeing pink there, which is the category for residential land use. So these, of course, are some of the more urban streams within residential areas within the municipality of Nanaimo. I'll move now also to the sites that are monitored by the Island Water Fly Fishers, as well as VIU student volunteers. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, there we go. I'll zoom in here as well. So primarily, this is the Millstone River watershed. So we've got sites on Millstone River and then tributaries like McClure Creek, McGarrigle Creek, and then there's sites monitored in the Chase River as well as Cat Stream. And again, looking at land use within those watersheds, predominantly what we're seeing in the Millstone River watershed is agricultural land uses in the upper watershed, and that's actually Area C within the regional district of Nanaimo. It gets more urban, of course, as the river flows to the ocean. So predominantly agricultural land uses in the Millstone River watershed, but then looking at the Chase River watershed, for an example, more forestry. And then particularly what stands out here is that Cat Stream and Northfield Creek are both highly urbanized, 2 of the most urbanized creeks within the city, with a large portion of impervious surface, so roadways, rooftops, that sort of thing, and residential. And then the third one I'll show here are the sites that are monitored by the Nanaimo Area Land Trust. So we'll give it a second to load. But they're focused on monitoring in the south part of the region. So this is the Nanaimo River water region, as well as Holden Creek, which is more in the Cedar area. So I'll take a zoom in there. And again, if we're looking at land use by contrast, the Nanaimo River water region is predominantly forested. So if you're looking at the sample point along the Nanaimo River, there are 2 of them. If you're looking at the whole upstream area that drains to that point on the creek, predominantly looking at forestry land use, with some agriculture in the Holden Creek watershed, as well as Beck Creek. So now that we know a little bit about the sites of interest, I'm going to get into some of the results from the analysis. Again, this brings together data that was collected between 2011 and 2017, and we engaged consultants Ecoscape to run a comprehensive analysis looking at 3 key things. So first, they were looking at the water quality results and comparing them against the BC objectives and guidelines. They were looking for trends as well, so to see over that period, were there changes over time in terms of water quality? Were temperatures increasing or decreasing or staying stable, and so forth. The third thing they were looking at is statistically modeling, and this is where the land use component comes in, whether land uses have a predictable effect on water quality in terms of the 4 parameters that we're monitoring. So first I'll go into overall findings in terms of the regional analysis, so the whole data set, and then I'm going to go into some findings of interest for the city of Nanaimo. So first off, changes over time. So the message here is mostly we're seeing with the sites that had sufficient data to run trend analysis, that most sites, 27 out of the 34 that had sufficient data, had stable water quality and changes over time were not observed. Now, what this tells us is that this is providing really good baseline information so that if changes do come about, and we are seeing changes in precipitation and weather and climate change impacts, or if there's changes in terms of development and other things that change within the watershed, we have a good 6-year data set that gives us a baseline understanding of certain creeks and streams. So that's really good, showing the stable water quality results. And then there were some sites that experienced some changes, which we will get into. About 5 sites that had increases in summer and fall turbidity, turbidity being the cloudiness or particle matter within the water that can be a result of erosion. And then 2 sites that had changes in conductivity, conductivity being the ability of water to conduct electricity and being an indicator of mineral content in the water, sometimes a proxy of road runoff, or of groundwater influence in creeks and streams. So again, regional finding. Of all of the sites across the region, there was 12 that really jumped out as sites of concern, which means there were frequent exceedances of the water quality objectives or guidelines. So 12 of those sites that had recurring exceedances in terms of water quality parameters, 7 of those sites had high agricultural uses within the watershed, 2 had upstream stormwater outfalls that might have been an influencing factor, and 3 were not well understood, but likely related to variation in temperature and rainfall through the years. So of interest, we'll point out Cat Stream in the city of Nanaimo and Wally Creek that made it into this top 12 list, as well as 2 sites on Holden Creek, just south of the city. And then thirdly, the analysis looked at statistical predictors and whether land use had an influence on water quality results. And there's some interesting findings. So the findings said that when they put this into a model and ran the results, watersheds that had less than 60% forested land area or forest use land area were associated with changes in turbidity and conductivity. Watersheds with greater than 20% agricultural use were associated with higher turbidity and lower dissolved oxygen. And watersheds with paved road densities of greater than 0.002 meters per meter square was associated with increased conductivity and higher water temperatures. So what this is saying is that we can put the water quality results into a model that actually overlays the land use within those watersheds, and it can predict when we're going to see spikes in different water quality based on the land use composition. So now I'll point out results of interest to the city of Nanaimo. So in terms of changes over time, changes were observed in Cat Stream in terms of conductivity increasing over time. And again, this can be a proxy for road runoff, road salts. And so this is something that we do need to take a closer look at, but it was observed in Cat Stream. Nanaimo River's temperature is an increasing trend, but it should be noted that in the analysis, the trend around just air temperatures within the same period was also on the rise within the watershed. So that has a direct influence on the water temperatures, especially if you consider Nanaimo River being wide in its lower reaches, not a lot of tree cover because it's such a wide stretch at the lower reaches of the Nanaimo River. And turbidity was on an increasing trend, but still within guidelines. Again, as we see warmer temperatures and we see more high-intensity storms, there's more potential for erosion, such as the turbidity results increasing, but again, I'll point out still within guidelines. In terms of land use, these watersheds I've listed do exceed those thresholds in terms of greater than 20% agriculture in the Millstone and its tributaries, Beck Creek and Holden Creek, less than 60% forested, where you'd like to see that for Beck Creek and Holden Creek. And in terms of paved road densities, it's no surprise, but the urban watersheds for Cat Stream, Wally, and Departure Creek. So again, this indicates a greater risk for water quality issues, but they're not necessarily showing up, but it says that these streams are at higher risk because of the land use composition, but there can be interventions to make sure we can still protect water quality given the land use in the watersheds. So as we wrap up here, I'm going to focus on the 3 key parameters that we're monitoring for that have guidelines. So temperature being one of them. The guideline is to be less than 17 degrees Celsius for coho rearing. And basically we're looking at were the data results within the guidelines on average, or were there frequent exceedances? And I've listed the urban creeks there, as well as the rural watercourses. And so temperatures were looking good across the averages for Departure Creek, Cottle Creek, approaching exceedances in Wally and Northfield, so something to keep an eye on. But definitely coming in high on Cat Stream and Chase River. And again, higher temperatures can be linked to low flows, but also to lack of riparian or streamside vegetation shading the water as well. And then if we look in the rural watercourses, Benson Creek, McGarrigle and McClure, as well as Haslam, come in within guidelines. Something to pay closer attention to in Becca Creek, as well as Nanaimo, and high temperatures in the Millstone and Holden Creek as well. Next up, dissolved oxygen. So the instantaneous minimum says that you cannot have less than 5 milligrams per liter, or over a 30-day period, an average of 8 milligrams per liter. So again, looks good in terms of averages for Departure Creek, Northfield, Cat Stream, Chase River, McGarrigle, McClure, Millstone, and Beck Creek, but something to keep a closer eye on in Wally Creek, and is of concern in Cottle Creek, as well as Benson and Holden Creek. So again, this is looking at the averages. There were still outliers, but if we're looking at the averages, this is the results coming over that 7-year data set. And then lastly, turbidity. So again, this was the particle matter, cloudiness, a sign of erosion entering creeks and streams. Something to keep an eye on in Wally Creek, Cat Stream, Northfield, and McClure, as well as Holden, with some of the other creeks approaching, and many others within guidelines. So again, to summarize, we've got a great data set of 7 years of data that would otherwise not be collected if not for mobilizing citizens and community members who are trained to collect this data by us to provincial protocol. That is then entered into the provincial database and available to decision makers, and it allows us to point out where there are issues for further investigation and to keep track of the trends within the watersheds. So I'm getting to my time, so I'm going to wrap up on recommendations. Overall, City of Nanaimo cites the recommendations from the report point to additional parameters for monitoring to help to tease out when we do see these baseline indicators showing us certain results. Can we narrow in on the source of those water quality issues? And primarily within the urban creeks of Wally, Departure, and Cat Stream, it was recommended to do additional sampling for chloride, which is a proxy for road runoff, and especially in winters like this where there's salts on the road. Supporting streamside vegetation and improvement and enhancement within riparian areas was pointed out as a recommendation, and particularly this is needed on Cat Stream. There are efforts already underway with streamkeeper groups to do plantings and revegetation, but this was underscored within the findings of the report. Further, operationally, in terms of drainage and stormwater management, support for rain gardens and bioswales to slow and filter stormwater before it enters the creeks was another recommendation coming from the report, as well as continued education on the benefits of practicing stream health protection. Overall, across the region, we're recommended to continue with our education and outreach on both stormwater management practices within the municipalities and for private landowners, but also outside of the municipalities, focusing on agricultural stewardship. Policies to ensure streamside vegetation, make sure it's retained is encouraged, as well as, again, on the green infrastructure side of rain gardens, bioswales. And we'll continue to update the mapping of land cover over time and perform trend analysis as more data becomes available. So So that's it for my presentation. I'll end by also saying we are within the year where we're updating our 10-year action plan for drinking water and watershed protection, and we will be coming forward to the RDN board by way of different avenues and to the public, so there will be lots of engagement opportunity to update the action plan for the next 10 years in terms of education, science, and planning for water sustainability in the region. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Pisani, thank you very much for coming this evening and sharing this information with us. Just a quick question. You referenced the valuable contribution of volunteers in gathering the data, specifically stream keepers, and I know they do play a very valuable role in monitoring our watershed. If some citizen is watching this and is interested in getting involved with that, can they contact you at the RDN or can they contact somebody at the city? What would be best?
Sure. So to Councillor Thorpe through the Mayor, yes, you can, if you're interested in participating in any community-based monitoring within our waterways, you can reach out to the email address we have on the screen here, which will reach me, waterprotection@rdn.bc.ca, and we'll make sure we can set you up with a streamkeeper group within your area of interest, because there are so many groups across the region, and there might very well be one in your backyard that's already active and working, and we can help to match make and set you up with the groups that are active and doing work within the region. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Through the chair, thank you for the presentation. And I'm just curious, from the results, was there any results or that surprised you, that you took note of that you weren't expecting?
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Gesselbrock, through the Mayor. Yeah, in terms of surprises with the data, I think a lot of it really did reinforce what we were seeing in terms of impacts from urban areas, so urban creeks and streams, seeing a lot of the impacts of having, stormwater inputs, seeing the impacts of not having as much riparian cover in certain areas. So that wasn't necessarily as much of a surprise. I think the ability to quantify, to say, okay, within the context of a watershed as a whole, once you see, less forested area, more agriculture, more pavement, then that statistically shows we're going to have changes in water quality. So I think what that does is just reinforces things that we think are intuitive and might seem like common sense, but then it gives it the data behind it. And I think that gives us support for things like tree retention, for riparian buffers and streamside protection. It gives us, support for green infrastructure. So the idea of having bioswales and rain gardens filter water before it goes jetting right into the creeks. So I think weren't necessarily any surprises, but it helped to sort of compile and contextualize the data from all across the region to start to see patterns and then hopefully help to influence next steps and what we can do. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the delegation. When you were doing your studies, did you keep track of chemical compositions of the water, pH levels, nitrate levels from agriculture? And do you have any suggestions on how we can increase the oxygen levels in some of those lower streams, because that has a definite effect on salmon-bearing streams?
Right. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bonner, through the Mayor. So first off, I guess I'll start with the latter part around increasing dissolved oxygen. So a lot of that has to do with maintaining flow. So a lot of the areas where we see low dissolved oxygen is because there's extremely low flows. But also it can do with the structure of the creek or stream. So one thing that you can do to increase dissolved oxygen is actually provide more structure through stream rehabilitation, where it's things like adding more cobbles so that there's the ability for the water to roll over and actually aerate as it goes over certain structures within the stream course. But a lot of it comes back to the inputs. So your first question was around looking at chemical constituents within the water. And I'd say for our analysis and for this program, it was the 4 parameters of temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, and turbidity. However, we are able to do additional lab analysis, and we had done that in 2015, specifically for phosphorus, as well as for heavy metals and E. coli. So those are in certain areas where we did see higher turbidity, lower dissolved oxygen. It's that piece of sort of teasing out, well, what's the source of that? So part of the recommendations here was for additional chloride monitoring, again, to see if there's a link between the stormwater inputs, so the road runoff, into the stream health, and to quantify that. In terms of nitrogen, I would say it's phosphorus. That is what we're looking at for agricultural input indicator, because the streams on eastern Vancouver Island are phosphorus limited. So that means if there is an influx of phosphorus runoff from agricultural fields or that sort of a thing, then that's where you'll see algae blooms and those sorts of basically taking up of oxygen within the creek. So that is sort of an additional monitoring on top of the baseline parameters. And I would say, stream restoration, improving the structure within the streams of the pools and the riffles. And that's what we do engage stream keepers groups with a seed funding and grant we do have available for, okay, now we have the results. Next steps is to do some restoration, and those folks can apply for some seed funding to do that work. And then we will additionally do lab analysis to tease out certain source issues as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Gusselbaum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, curious, was there any data where restoration projects had been undertaken in the watershed that showed, with work and increasing the riparian area and changing stormwater management, that the health of the streams improved over time?
Excellent question. Thank you, Councillor, through the Mayor. I think that's what we're really going to start to see as we continue to do this monitoring. So initially in the first 7 years of the program, we're collecting baseline information to understand, okay, what's the current status of the creeks and streams? Then we're sort of targeting restoration works or enhancement works, and by continuing to run the monitoring program, we can see, so there has been riparian planting already on Departure Creek, on Wally Creek. There's going to be some on Cat Stream, and there has been some on Millstone, but it's not something you see the next year. You can plant some alders and streamside vegetation, but it's not going to be the next year that you have shade. So it's a long-term monitoring program in the sense that first we monitor to direct restoration efforts, but we continue to monitor to make sure that those restoration efforts are having a positive effect that was intended. And it's that adaptive management piece where we continue to collect information, act upon it, but continue to receive the results, and that will dictate what we do next. So I think, the next time we're up here presenting after the next trend analysis, hopefully we'll have more quantifiable examples to point to where the trees have grown up, that were planted. We're seeing lower temperatures, thankfully. We're seeing less erosion, less turbidity, and that's the long-term goal of a program like this.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Very good, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
Very
Appreciate
thorough.
it.
Next item is delegations, and we have none, Ms. Gurry, correct? And then the next is a motion for adoption of consent items, and I gather you would like that separated so that we vote firstly on governance priorities committees. That's 1A only.
That's correct, Your Worship. So you can vote on consent item 9A1, and then we can deal with number 2 separately.
All right. Motion from Councillor Bonner on 9A1, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? It's consent items after all. All right, all those in favor? Motion carried, thank you.
And thank you, Worship. So I just wanted to separate out 9A2, Council Resolutions Update, just to let Council and the public that may not have watched the Committee of the Whole on February of 25th, that staff brought to Council a resolutions report going back to January 1st, 2017, of all of the resolutions made by Council since that time, and we separated out a list of the outstanding resolutions. And so noted here are some motions that Council has made to rescind a few of the motions, and going forward, I just wanted the public to know that, and Council to know, we'll be reporting on a more regular basis on these outstanding resolutions so that Council can have an up-to-date snapshot of where staff is at, what remains outstanding, and if they would like to change any of the direction that they have provided. So that's it, Your Worship.
Very good, thank you very much. Appropriate motion, Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Motion carried, thank you. We are now on to reports. Mr. Lindsay. It's rezoning application number RA 410-Unit 9, 1599 Dufferin Crescent. Evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, we have a rezoning application for your consideration this evening for first and second reading of the associated amendment bylaw. The bylaw, if adopted, will add cannabis retail store as a site-specific use on the subject property. Your Worship, the report includes the rezoning criteria that were established prior to opening the city for intake of these applications. Staff's comment on each of the criteria items are included in the report. I would note that in general, staff have indicated at least those criteria that have a spatial separation consideration. Staff are of the opinion that the application meets those criteria.
Very good, thank you. And Mr. Griffiths doesn't wish to speak to it unless there are questions. Any questions for Mr. Griffiths? Councillor Martman?
I was just going to move.
Oh, sorry, okay. So no questions for Mr. Griffiths. He can remain comfortably seated. Councillor Bonner, you do.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.133 to rezone Unit 9 at 1599 Dufferin Crescent to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the Hospital Urban Center CC5 zone pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. I know Councillor Martman's anxious to get her in tonight, but we'll let her in a little bit. All those in favor? Contrary, motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.133 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner.
I brought this up before, and I'll just keep banging my drum until someone listens. I think the community contribution in this particular case is still too low. We're basically giving a company a monopoly in a certain area to sell a product, and it's fairly lucrative product. It makes good money. And I think the community contribution should reflect more of the value that we're giving this particular zoning to. I would think that 30,000 would be in line with this type of application.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary, motion carried. Thank you.
And motion that council direct staff to secure the amenity contribution and BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch approval prior to adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary, motion carried. Thank you very much. Next, Intercommunity Business License Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7176.01. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As outlined in the report, this is a proposed amendment to the Inter-Community Business License bylaw. This is a bylaw that the City of Nanaimo was one of the original founding members of, and the original bylaw was established just over 5 years ago. And at that time, it was with the intent of allowing for those types of businesses which may have their home base in one municipality to obtain one of these intermunicipal business licenses, which would allow them to then practice their craft in all of the participating municipalities without requiring multiple business licenses, which was the case, prior to this bylaw coming into place. So, for example, if you're an electrician within the City of Nanaimo, you would get a City of Nanaimo business license. You could get yourself a intermunicipal business license, and it would allow you to participate or to practice in all of those participating municipalities. And right now, that includes generally the Mid-Island area. I would say from Campbell River over to Port Alberni and as far south as Duncan. Generally, those areas within that geographical area that currently have a business license function. What this amendment will do is primarily three things, but first of all, allow for the expansion of this program to the greater Victoria area. Right now, there are two member municipalities Esquimalt, and I believe the other was Saanich possibly. I'm sorry, I forget now. But there's two that have signed on, but the way the bylaw is structured, all of the remaining members in the Greater Victoria area are able to sign on to the bylaw without further amendments from our bylaw. So the expectation is that ultimately there'll be up to 25 participating members as part of the inter-community business license program. In addition, the amendment bylaw, it was agreed amongst the existing partners to increase the fee from $150 to $170 a year. There was some clarity around which types of businesses are not exempt, and there was including cannabis stores and mobile food vendors. Your Worship, obviously, the bylaw is before you this evening for the first three readings, and we'll need to come back to Council for final adoption.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Good news for small business. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Motion that Inter-Community Business License Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7176.01 to expand the participants in the Inter-Municipal Business Licensing Program pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Motion carried.
Motion that Inter-Community Business License Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7176.01 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. I certainly support this this bylaw, and I think it's a good step forward, as the mayor indicated, to support small businesses. Maybe I just missed it in the report, but I'm not sure on how the revenue sharing works with this, or if there is revenue sharing. Am I correct that whatever municipality the license is bought in gets the revenue, or is there a sharing formula?
No. Thank you, through Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe. That is correct. It's whatever municipality that it's collected in retains that revenue. So, for example, in the report, it showed that last year there was 527 of these licenses issued within the city of Nanaimo. That approximately $80,000 of revenue is retained within the city.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Just for clarification, if I may then, through the mayor, it says here about prorating the fee quarterly to align with what is currently practices for new business licenses will be seen as a positive change.
Sorry, Your Worship, and that is a good point through yourself to Councillor Martman. What's that is referring to is another small amendment that's being proposed as part of this. Is currently today, if someone comes in, say for example, halfway through the year and they open up a new business in the city, we prorate our business license fees, so you basically pay half a fee. But under this current bylaw, there is no such ability. So if you come in and you apply late in the year for an inter-community business license, you still pay the full amount. What this amendment will do is allow for prorating amongst all of the member municipalities for both the main business license and now for the inter-community business license.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Mr. Lindsay, I probably missed this, but so a business operating in the city of Nanaimo that wants one of these licenses, they pay the bylaw or the license for Nanaimo plus the intercity one, so it'd be a total of $320, correct?
Sorry, through Your Worship, to Councillor Turley, that is correct. So it's again those businesses which would be eligible. There's only certain types of businesses that would be eligible, but you're correct, yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion contrary, motion carried.
I was waiting for an eye contact here. Motion that Inter-Community Business License Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7176.01 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Contrary, motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
I think we're done.
Yes, thank you. Council appointments to the Parcel Tax Roll Review Panel. Ms. Gurry, this is an onerous task, I understand.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to have council appoint no less than 3 members of council to the Parcel Tax Roll Review Panel. This is an annual appointment that I'll be coming to you every year about this time, requesting that you appoint 3 members. And the panel only sits if there are complaints to the panel, so it's not very often, if ever, that it does meet, but it is a requirement under Section 204 of the Community Charter. So I would ask council to just nominate amongst yourselves at least three members. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to nominate Councillor Turley.
Councillor Turley, you accept? Any further nominations? We need 2 more. Councillor Martman?
I nominate Councillor Brown.
Oh, excellent idea. Councillor Brown, you accept? Sure. I would like some gender balance on this committee, given its onerous task, please.
Let's nominate
That is the old rule in the Nanaimo City Bar. If you're not there for the executive meeting, you get stuck with it. I don't think that would be fair, however, so I'm going to suggest that...
I nominate Councillor Hemmings.
Councillor Hemmings, do you accept? Yeah. I'm not seeing any further nominations. Then a motion to appoint Councillors Turley, Brown, and Hemmings made by Councillor Thorpe. Yes, seconded. Councillor Gesselbrock. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you for stepping forward in the hour of need. On to bylaws. Parks, Recreation and Culture Amendment Regulation Bylaw 2019, number 7073.07.
Great.
Poor Councillor Bonner. It's a long list tonight.
Motion that Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7073.07, to allow for overnight shelter in city parks and other regulatory matters be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7159.04.
Motion that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 715904, to update enforcement penalty rates be adopted.
Seconded. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Public Nuisance Bylaw number 2019, number 7267. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that Public Nuisance Bylaw 2019, number 7267, to update and consolidate offenses related to nuisances, disturbances, and uncivil behavior be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Bylaw Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7159.05.
Motion that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7159.05, to include new offenses and an updated fine schedule be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that Cross Connection Control Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7249.01, to adopt amendments for consistent enforcement be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7159.06, for ticketing and enforcement of penalty sections of the new Cross Connection Control Bylaw be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Thorpe, sorry, pardon me. All those in favor?
I've been called.
Motion carried. Contrary, motion carried. Yes, you have been called worse, actually. Much worse. Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 2019, number 7253.04. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7253.04, to amend the 2018 to 2022 financial plan be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. I understand there's no correspondence.
Out of a job.
We don't have any notices of motion. Any other business? And question period. Thank you very much. Ms. Ambo.
Hello.
Good evening.
How are you? I wasn't able to attend the meeting today regarding all of the information that was shared because I had to work. So I'm asking if I can ask a question regarding sort of this afternoon's information.
Ms. Gurry.
It's a positive.
Thank you, Worship. Unfortunately, no, the procedure bylaw calls for questions only to be regarding agenda items for the council meeting only.
Very good. Let me just say this, however, in response. It was a very useful discussion. A certain number of the public were in attendance, and the council heard a great deal of very useful information, I think, that might assist us in moving forward around some of the difficult issues. I think it was broadcast or it is available on the city website, or will be.
That's correct, Your Worship, yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry to waste your time.
Chrissy Forsyth. Very good. I can only suggest politely that you do watch the presentation. I thought it was very useful and cogent remarks made by all. I do appreciate your attendance at council, however, and your concern for your community, and that you continue to reflect it by appearing here. Having said that, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Eat that, Councillor Thorpe.
I'm in big trouble.
Are you tired of dragging the garbage out? They just don't make them like they used to. It's a saying that doesn't really apply to garbage cans. Yes, young man,